What is happening in America today is not a new phenomenon. The assault on immigrants, minorities, and people of color, the erosion of our freedoms, the vitriol spewed out from those in power demonstrate a pervasive social cancer present in our democracy from its birth. It exists perhaps in the genetic markings of every human being, revealing that our struggle for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations is as much an interpersonal battle as it is a cry for social justice. We are all infected and exposed to some degree. This is the call to truth, the drumbeat that our Unitarian Universalist Association has been sounding in recent decades. It comes across sometimes as harsh. It is bitter medicine to hear that each of us might incubate the disease of prejudice and racism. It is painful to be called upon to search our own interiors and bare our souls to the light of truth. Our cultural inclinations and our human nature tell us that someone is to blame, but it isn't us. When yet another black man, Tyree Nichols, is beaten to death in Memphis by the hands of power and privilege, the perpetrators must be punished, we declare, even if they are black officers. Better, in fact, if they are black. Some say that proves it was not a racist act. It's confusing and sometimes paralyzing. In his book, The Selma Awakening, retired UU minister, the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, a black man and the foremost scholar of African American UU history, tells us what happened on Monday, March 8, 1965, when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dispatched a telegram that read, "In the vicious maltreatment of defenseless citizens of Selma, where old women and young children were gassed and clubbed at random, we have witnessed an eruption of the disease of racism which seeks to destroy all of America. No American is without responsibility. All are involved in the sorrow that rises from Selma to contaminate every crevice of our national life. The people of Selma will struggle on for the soul of the nation, but it is fitting that all America help to bear the burden. I call, therefore, on clergy of all faiths, representative of every part of the country, to join me for a minister's march to Montgomery on Tuesday morning, March 9th. In this way, all America will testify to the fact that the struggle in Selma is for the survival of democracy everywhere in our land." The UUA was not quite 4 years old when Reverend King sent his urgent telegram to the Boston headquarters. asking religious leaders to join him in Selma. Two of the Unitarian Universalists who responded paid with their lives. So begins an article appearing in our publication, UU World, in May 2001. That same issue contained a speech from Dr. King that had been lost for 35 years. It was the eulogy that King delivered at the memorial for one of those two martyrs, a UU minister. "Who killed James Reeb?" he asked rhetorically. The answer is simple and rather limited. He was murdered by a few sick, demented, and misguided men. What killed James Reeb? King pondered further. When we move from the who to the what, the blame is wide and the responsibility grows. He was murdered by the indifference of every minister who has remained silent behind the safe security of stained glass windows. He was murdered by the irrelevancy of a church that will stand amid social evil and serve as a tail light rather than a headlight, an echo rather than a voice. End quote. The Reverend Richard Leonard was a 37-year-old minister of education at the Community Church of New York when he answered Dr. King's call to Selma. His personal diary, right here, of those 18 days offers a remarkable inside look into the social activism of an infant Unitarian Universalism. Richard Leonard was the only UU to complete the entire Selma to Montgomery march, 50 miles, with King and 300 others. These are the facts of that event, according to Reverend Sinkford in his introduction. February 1965, King and 500 school children are arrested in Selma. February 18, Jimmy Lee Jackson, a 23-year-old black man, is killed in the night by state troopers. March 7, 600 marchers are turned back at Edmund Pettus Bridge, as you witnessed, with hoses, billy clubs, and tear gas. It became known as Bloody Sunday. March 8, Dr. King calls for clergy to join him in Selma. March 9, 450 clergy walk to the bridge. One of them, Reverend James Reeb, is assaulted that night back in Selma and dies 2 days later in a Montgomery hospital. March 13, the UUA Board of Trustees adjourns its Boston meeting and goes to Selma. March 15, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivers Reeb's eulogy. March 21, more than 3,000 people leave Selma toward Montgomery, the capital. Among them, nearly 200 Unitarian Universalists. March 25, over 25,000 people join the marchers at the entrance to Montgomery. March 26. Viola Greg Liuzzo, a UU from Detroit, is killed by the KKK driving to Montgomery to pick up marchers. August 6, President LBJ signs the Voting Rights Act. The rights we claim to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not, in fact, inalienable. The word inalienable means that which cannot be given away or taken away. They are currently the privilege of wealth, position, power, and pinkness. They can be and routinely are taken away by the forces of prejudice, fear, and greed. History is not a smooth and sure transition along that arc that bends toward justice. We stagger and move in fits and starts. We struggle and fall into remission. The Reverend Dr. King said, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. His wife, Coretta, reported that Dr. King once said, we all have to decide whether we will walk in the light of creative altruism or the darkness of destructive selfishness. Dr. King was fond of quoting a Bible passage from Mark 9:35, which says, whosoever will be great among you will be your servant, and whosoever among you will be first shall be the servant of all. Mrs. King declared the importance of remembering King. It is to teach young people to fight evil, not people. To get into the habit of asking ourselves, what is the most loving way I can resolve this conflict? So that young people learn about the power of unconditional love as a way to fight injustice and diffuse violence, and to show them the power of forgiveness in the healing process. No message is more needed today on a level from interpersonal to international. Archie Williams, who sang "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me," was released just 3 years ago after serving 36 years in federal prison, one of the worst in Louisiana, for a rape he didn't commit. In spite of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, including fingerprints, eyewitnesses, DNA forensics, and tampering with evidence by the state, it took more than 30 years to set him free with help from the Innocence Project, promising he would never allow evil to live in his heart. The 59-year-old singer who watched AGT from his prison wowed the crowd with his audition of the Elton John hit in September 2020. Elton called Archie after the performance and said it brought him to tears. In the time since I first delivered this sermon in 2006, another book was written by a UU minister on the place of our history in the civil rights struggle. The Selma Awakening discusses not just how we changed the movement, but how it changed us. And much as I love to boast about our role in social justice, Morrison Reed reminds us that it has always been a precious few people with the courage and vision to stand against the moral failings of our culture. The route to Selma was long, he says. When we compare the espoused values of Universalism and Unitarianism to their values in practice, we find a stark disparity. One of those courageous few was Kenneth Patton. In a sermon declaring for color in 1947, Patton said, "I resign from the white race." His announcement and his sermon were broadcast on the radio. It was the equivalent of going viral. At All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., the minister A. Powell Davies announced, "I shall from this time on not eat a meal in any restaurant in D.C. that will not serve meals to Negroes. I invite all who truly believe in human brotherhood to do the same. We have talked enough. It is time for action." I heard an interview on NPR just recently. The Reverend Dante Stewart, black theologian, author of Shoutin' in the Fire. Reverend Stewart offered a black spiritual perspective on the killing of Tyree Nichols that helped me to better understand and clarify my feelings about police brutality and the role of black police in all of this. Stewart said, "The question is not, as we often hear, is there such thing as good police and bad police? The question is, why has policing continued to produce such terrible human beings? And why aren't those in power doing more to stop what they are doing?" His interviewer, Scott Tong, pointed out that everyone involved was black and asked, "Are you suggesting racism in the system of law enforcement exists, whoever the police officers happen to be?" He said, "I am not suggesting it. History is suggesting it." Reverend Stewart replied, "Just because black people are present doesn't mean anti-blackness is absent. History tells the story that it doesn't matter who has the badge. The badge has power that whiteness has given it in the world. Police officers, no matter who they are or where they come from, when they enter the force," he said, "it is exactly that. It is a force that exercises power in this world." He compared it to playing college football at Clemson University. As an athlete, he said, "We buy into a courtship that distorts our self-conception. We believe that we are other, and we function with a power that others are not able to function in. As a black person, he said, when I get the badge or when I get the ball, my race is under the shadow of it. So it doesn't matter who it is. It's about what policing has meant and has done to us and continues to do to us. The historical record, he said, shows that no matter who they are or where they come from, policing does something to people in this country. And we know it, and we better deal with it. Reverend Stewart was asked about his decision whether or not to watch the videos of more than an hour of the brutality. He said, yes, I believe vicarious suffering is a very real thing. We do not just suffer alone, but we see what other people go through and have to endure, and we feel that pain as well. But I also believe vicarious love is a thing as well. And I've chosen to watch because I don't want his family in some spiritual way to have to endure that alone. In order for me to communicate through writing and through thinking and through empathy, I want to be with Tyree through every moment. And not just in that video, but also in the video of him skateboarding. In the video of his mother saying, "That's my baby." I don't want them to go through it alone. And as my pastor said in his last Sunday sermon, God has not forgotten you. How do you know that? He said the divine is in our struggle because we are with one another in our pain. Amen.